The atmosphere inside the war chamber of Gorthar was thicker than any oxygen could explain. Great pillars of volcanic stone framed the circular hall, etched with the battle histories of the Gortharian race, glorious conquests, brutal defeats, and endless cycles of war. Flames crackled in recessed braziers, casting flickering shadows over armored faces. At the center of it all stood Commander Thariuk, the living embodiment of Gortharian honor and strength. His armor was blackened from real combat, not ceremonial polish, and the curved scar across his cheek told of victories that still haunted him in sleep. His hand rested on the hilt of his ceremonial sword, but his stance was relaxed. That made it even more dangerous. When Thariuk was relaxed, someone usually bled. Across from him, standing alone in a circle of hostile silence, was Riley Moore, human, diplomat, unarmed. She wore the standard dark uniform of the Galactic Coalition, with the small silver pin denoting her as a Tier 1 negotiator. She didn't look like much. Her blonde hair was tied back casually, her boots bore signs of long travel, and there was nothing about her that looked intimidating, at least not to the Gortarians. To them, she was just another smooth-skinned talker sent to mediate with those too proud to be ordered and too wounded to kneel. Behind her, the Coalition delegation stood quietly, visibly tense. One aide wiped sweat from his brow while another gripped a datapad so tightly the screen threatened to crack. They knew how easily things could go wrong here, and Riley, she looked more interested in the flickering patterns of the fire than the row of weapons pointed indirectly in her direction. Commander Thariuk raised his voice, the gravel of his native accent shaping every word into a weapon. "We have listened to your terms. We have tolerated your human talk of peace, and yet you insult us with your presence here, unarmed, untested, and unworthy." Riley met his gaze. She didn't flinch. She never did. "You requested a meeting, not a trial by combat." Thariuk's lip curled. "And what is diplomacy but another kind of war? If you represent your people, then show us you understand our ways. Come before us not as a diplomat, but as a warrior. Dress for war, Earthborn, or leave." There was a low rumble from the surrounding council, a deep, guttural hum of approval. The other Gortarians, draped in ceremonial armor with blades as tall as a man's chest, nodded slowly. A few thumped their fists against their chests. The meaning was clear. Only strength spoke here. Riley had come with words. That made her weak. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with expectation. The Coalition aides began to whisper nervously. One of them took a step forward, preparing to protest. Riley raised her hand slightly. He stopped. She didn't break eye contact with the commander. Her voice was calm. "If I comply and I come back tomorrow dressed for war, as you say, what will that prove to you?" The Rook chuckled, a deep sound like rocks grinding beneath pressure. "It will prove that you are capable of listening, that you are willing to honor a culture not your own, that you do not insult the blood of those who died on this soil." Riley tilted her head slightly. "And if I don't?" He leaned forward, slow and deliberate, the firelight glinting off his jagged shoulder plates. "Then we will assume Earth has no interest in peace. And you will leave this place, without your head." No one laughed. It wasn't a metaphor. Riley understood that perfectly well. Still, she didn't react. Instead, she glanced up at the massive basalt mural behind him. A depiction of a Gortharian warrior decapitating a giant insectoid opponent. Her lips parted slightly in thought, but she said nothing. The tension in the room stretched thinner and thinner, until at last she spoke again. "Very well," she said. "Tomorrow, I'll return." One of the aides visibly exhaled in relief. Another looked at her in disbelief, unsure whether she'd just agreed to dress for war or agreed to die. Commander Thariuk nodded, satisfied. "Good," he said. "Come armed, armored, and ready to show us what your kind calls strength." Riley gave a short bow. "I'll be here." And with that, she turned and walked away, her footsteps soft against the obsidian tiles. The Coalition entourage scrambled to follow her, casting backward glances at the Gortarians, who were already murmuring to one another in low, guttural voices. One of the younger warriors whispered, "She will not return." Thoric's eyes stayed on the chamber doors long after she vanished through them. "She will," he muttered. She has the eyes of one who's already chosen how the story ends. Outside the chamber, as the hallway swallowed the delegation, the aides immediately began talking over each other. "Commander, are you seriously going through with this? You can't possibly think you can fight them. She didn't mean literal war, right? Right?" Riley stopped walking and turned around to face them. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut through their panic. "No one said anything about fighting." One of them blinked. "But you agreed to dress for war." "I did," she said. "And tomorrow, I will." There was silence. Riley smiled faintly. It wasn't smug. It was thoughtful, like someone turning a problem around in her mind, looking at it from all sides. "But I never said whose definition of war I would use." With that, she walked away again, leaving her team in stunned confusion. In the war chamber, the fires burned steadily, as if waiting. Tomorrow, Gorthar would witness something it had never seen before. Not in 10,000 years of blood and iron, not on any battlefield, and not in any prophecy carved into its stone. Tomorrow, Riley Moore would return, and she would come in flip-flops. The sun of Gorthar rose late and heavy, casting a crimson glow over the sharpened spires of the city's war towers. Thin banners fluttered between the black columns that surrounded the war chamber plaza, each dyed in the blood-tone hues of the clans who had spilled their history into the volcanic stone below. This was no ordinary morning. The drums had started before sunrise, their hollow beats echoing through the city with a rhythm that called warriors from every tier of society. The humans might have called it a meeting, but to the Gortharians, today was something far greater. Today was a test of identity. Crowds gathered in concentric rings around the war chamber steps. Even the highest caste commanders, whose status normally kept them above the rabble, stood shoulder to shoulder with the foot soldiers. At the chamber's entrance, Commander Tharuk stood silent, arms folded behind his back, flanked by his inner circle of elite warriors. His face was impassive, but his fingers flexed once, an unconscious twitch of anticipation. He had dressed in full battle armor, a jet-black exosuit carved with the sigils of his victories and reinforced with living ore mined from beneath the planet's third moon. His ceremonial blade hung across his back, but he would not draw it unless the insult became unbearable. The plaza fell quiet the moment the first footstep echoed down the central causeway. It wasn't a stomp, nor a boot crunch, nor the metallic clank of armor. It was soft, flat, a strange, hollow slap. Another step followed, then another. The sound was light, almost comical in the silence. Somewhere in the crowd, someone stifled a snort, but the snort died quickly, replaced by a dozen startled intakes of breath. She was walking down the stone path alone. Riley Moore. No guards, no armor, no visible weapons. She wore a loose pair of tan linen trousers, cropped just above the ankle, and an oversized gray shirt with a faded emblem no one could identify. Her hair was down, flowing freely behind her in the morning breeze, and on her feet, those slap-slap echoes that had reached the chamber before she had, were bright orange flip-flops, worn, cracked. One of them flapped open slightly at the side as if the sole had begun to separate. The crowd stared, jaws slack. One Gortharian warrior actually took a step backward. Commander Tharuk narrowed his eyes, but his face remained unreadable. Riley walked calmly, as if her arrival were unremarkable. She didn't flinch as she passed towering soldiers armed to the teeth. She didn't lower her eyes when glared at. She didn't speak. She simply walked, the rubber soles of her flip-flops making that same absurd noise with every step, echoing through the reverent silence like mockery. When she reached the chamber's stairs, she stopped. Commander Tharuk stepped forward. "You mock us." She looked up at him, unblinking. "Not at all. You told me to dress for war. This is what I wear when war becomes inevitable." Gasps rippled across the crowd. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her voice carried because it didn't shake. Her tone had no edges, but it cut just the same. One of Tharuk's captains growled. "You come barefoot and laughing while we honor the codes written in our blood?" "I'm not laughing," Riley interrupted gently. "But yes, I come as I am. Because I didn't mistake this for a costume party." Another wave of shocked murmurs. The captain took a step forward, his hand inching toward the hilt of his sword. Tharuk lifted a hand, halting him. His eyes stayed locked on her. "You claim this is your battle attire?" She nodded. When my people are pushed beyond reason, when we've tried everything else, when all decorum is gone, this is what I wear. Loose clothes, minimal gear. It means I've prepared for what comes next. And what comes next isn't pretty. A few warriors exchanged confused glances. One older Gortharian in the back muttered something under his breath. The implication wasn't lost on the audience. The Ruck tilted his head slightly. So, you come unarmored and unarmed. What are we to believe? That your strength lies in your posture? In your sandals? No, she said, stepping onto the first stair. You're meant to believe that I'm here because I respect you enough to show you the truth, not play dress-up in symbols I haven't earned. This, she gestured to herself, is war. Not this cloth, not these shoes. Me. Tharok's expression darkened. And how do you intend to prove that? She walked up the rest of the stairs without answering, her flip-flops slapping all the way to the top. When she reached the stone platform, she stopped only an arm's length from him. She didn't reach for anything. She simply looked at him, straight into the eyes of a killer, and smiled, not a mocking smile, not smug, your challenge. He studied her face. Her muscles were relaxed, her breathing was steady, there was no scent of fear on her. Not even the smallest twitch betrayed panic. It wasn't a mask. He'd seen masks. This was something else. The air shifted. Riley turned to face the crowd. You were expecting a blade, or armor, or perhaps some ancient relic passed down from Earth's warriors. But those are symbols, and humans, we don't always use symbols. She looked back at the commander. We use meaning. With one smooth motion, she reached down and pulled off her right flip-flop. The crowd tensed. A weapon? A trick? But no, she held it up, dangling by the rubber strap. When my people go to war and the talking stops, this is what we use. A silence followed. Then a ripple of uncertain laughter. Some tried to hold it in, others failed. Even a few of the more serious warriors chuckled behind closed mouths. Then she pointed with the same flip-flop toward the command dais. But don't mistake me. I didn't come to entertain you. I came to remind you what war really means. I'm not dressed for glory, I'm dressed for damage. She dropped the flip-flop. The sound echoed across the stone. Then she stepped forward barefoot, placing her heel on the chamber's center stone, the sacred circle where warriors once declared blood feuds. I'm here, you challenged me, you asked me to come ready, so here I am. Tharok stared at her. This human had brought no sword, no shield, no backup, no fear, and yet she had managed to tip the entire emotional balance of the crowd. The laughter was gone now. The hush was heavier than before. She had shown up in flip-flops, and no one was laughing anymore. Riley stood at the heart of the sacred platform, her bare feet pressing lightly into the warm stone as the wind coiled through the silence like a patient animal. Every eye was on her, some gleaming with curiosity, others hard with disdain, but none with laughter anymore. The weight of the moment had shifted. Her presence no longer appeared absurd. It felt deliberate, like a blade kept hidden until just the right moment. Commander Tharok watched her closely, his arms folded across his chest plate. He had said nothing since she stepped onto the center stone, and yet his silence now roared louder than any threat. The chamber's acoustics amplified every breath, and when Riley finally spoke again, her voice was low but firm, each word chosen with the precision of a scalpel. You asked for a display of strength. Most assume strength begins with the body, but history has proven otherwise. Real power, lasting power, begins in the mind. A scoff broke the silence. It came from Commander Vorn, one of Tharok's advisors, whose crimson armor clanked as he stepped forward from the side. His voice was sharp, clipped with arrogance. The mind does not win wars, steel does. Riley didn't even look at him. Steel rusts, the mind does not. She turned slowly to face the wider audience. You remember your ancestors for their weapons. We remember ours for what they did without them. A murmur ran through the crowd, uncertain but curious. Vorn stepped down again, visibly irritated, but said nothing more. Riley began to pace, slowly, deliberately, her bare feet making almost no sound against the ancient stone. You pride yourselves on honor, on strength, on a code rooted in tradition. I've studied it, I respect it. But the universe is changing faster than honor can adapt. You rely on fear, on stature, on intimidation. Let me tell you something that doesn't care about intimidation. Orbital velocity, chemical saturation, bacteria. She stopped and faced the crowd again. Your warriors have scars. Mine have trauma buried so deep that not even our own kind can always survive it. You fear death in battle. We learn to live with it in peace. Tharuk narrowed his eyes. You insult us with riddles. Riley shook her head gently. No, I reveal you to yourselves. Her hands remained relaxed at her sides, her posture open, unthreatening. But every syllable she spoke cut sharper than blades. You think of humans as soft, undisciplined. But I'll ask you something. Who here has ever fought a war for more than 1,000 years? Who has rebuilt after near extinction again and again and kept going? Who lives on a planet where nearly every living thing tries to kill us by accident? No one answered. She continued. Your world teaches you to fight your enemies. Ours teaches us to survive our friends. We negotiate with predators, we argue with the ocean, we bury our dead not because we are weak, but because death is routine. And we do it with art, with memory, with grace. An older warrior, one who had remained quiet until now, raised a clawed hand and spoke with genuine curiosity. Then why do your people seek alliances with races like ours? If you are so capable, why not stand alone? Riley looked at him and nodded respectfully. Because strength alone is never enough. Not for the long haul. We learned that the hard way. When we seek alliances, we don't seek protection. We seek perspective, balance, challenge. We are not here to dominate. We are here to endure. Commander Tharok stepped forward at last, his expression unreadable. Words are wind, he said. Wind cannot break bone. Riley met his gaze without blinking. No, but wind shapes mountains, slowly. Relentlessly. A hush fell again. The metaphor hung in the air like smoke. Riley took a slow breath and let her voice drop slightly. Let me ask you something, Commander. How many wars have you won? He frowned slightly. 13. Personally. And how many stayed one? She asked. That stopped him. A long pause followed. The crowd grew stiller. She pressed forward, her tone softer now but carrying more weight. You win. But your enemies return. You conquer. But peace never lasts. Because you measure victory by surrender, not understanding. By silence, not stability. She let that settle before continuing. My people have been through wars, yes, but our greatest victories never involved bloodshed. They involved compromise, collaboration, even with those we once swore to destroy. One of the Gortharian high priests stepped forward now. Tall and robed in black ceremonial cloth. His voice was cold and elegant. You use the language of the weak. Words to delay what is inevitable. Conflict is truth. Riley turned to face him fully. No. Conflict is friction. Truth is what remains after the heat. And your truth is this. You want to be feared. But you are already forgotten by those who do not fear you. If fear is the only language you speak, then you will never know how to be heard. The high priest stepped back in silence. She returned her attention to Tharuk. You asked me to come ready for war. I came with what I've used to survive every war I've ever fought. My mind, my restraint, my history. I didn't show up in armor because I didn't need to. You already came armed. I came to disarm. At that moment, something shifted in Tharuk's eyes. Not defeat, not anger. Something closer to caution. And then, the tiniest trace of respect. Riley stepped back, her voice quiet now. You wanted proof that I understood your ways. I do. But I also understand mine. And in mine, this, she tapped her temple with one finger, is deadlier than any sword you own. She let the words hang in the air for several seconds, then walked to the edge of the platform and sat on the stone lip, legs dangling like she had all the time in the galaxy. No one interrupted her. No one laughed. Commander Tharuk did not speak. He turned and walked down from the dais slowly, deeply, as if carrying the weight of an invisible decision. For the first time since the beginning of negotiations, the Gortarians were quiet not because they were waiting for blood, but because something had changed, and no one yet knew what it meant. The sky above the war chamber had darkened into a thick bronze hue, a natural consequence of Gorthar's volcanic dusk settling across the capital's jagged skyline. The heat had risen slightly, carrying the weight of unspoken tension through the plaza, where every spectator now stood in absolute stillness. Somewhere in the upper tier, a ceremonial horn had begun to hum lowly, signaling that words had been spoken, ideas had been exchanged, but that clarity had yet to be earned. Commander Tharuk remained at the edge of the platform, his back to Riley, his stance unmoving. He hadn't responded to her final remarks. His massive arms were clenched behind him, and the slight twitch of his fingers betrayed the storm brewing beneath his still surface. He was not a man accustomed to silence after confrontation. Among his people, challenge meant resolution, through action, not reflection. But today had unfolded in ways no code, no rite, no trial had prepared him for. Her words hadn't defeated him. They had left him without a battlefield. Riley still sat on the platform's edge, her legs crossed loosely, one foot bare, the other still in her lone remaining flip-flop. The bright orange strap looked absurd against the soot-backed stone, yet no one mocked it now. She gazed out at the horizon, thoughtful but not idle, watching the slow rise of distant ash clouds from the active range beyond the city's walls. She hadn't moved in several minutes, not out of defiance, but because there was nothing left for her to do. She had spoken her truth. The next action would not come from her. Then came the sound, heavy, purposeful, a step. Commander Tharuk turned to face her and walked back toward the center stone. The crowd murmured. His expression was carved from obsidian, cold and unreadable, but his hands no longer gripped at tension. Instead, they hung loosely at his sides, fingers slightly curled. When he spoke, his voice was no longer thunder. It was quieter, a tone he rarely used even among his own. Riley looked at him, then rose without urgency. She said nothing. He took another step closer. You claim strength is not in the body, but in the will. That action comes second to understanding. She nodded once. Yes. He stared down at her, towering in height, armored in traditions that had never before been questioned this way. Then show me, not through words, not through speeches, but through presence. The meaning struck her instantly. The crowd understood too, and a surge of energy passed through the plaza like a rolling tremor. This was not a request, it was a challenge, but not the one they had expected. No weapons were drawn, no duel was declared. Yet everyone knew the trial had begun. Commander Tharuk took 5 paces back, unstrapped the ceremonial blade from his shoulder, and laid it on the ground behind him. Then he stepped back into the center stone with his arms open, offering no defense, no aggression. It was a signal older than written history, a rite of body, not combat, a test of balance, presence, reflex, and will. The trial of proving. Few humans had ever seen it. None had ever been invited to take part. Riley stepped into the circle. Whispers rippled across the spectators. The old generals turned to each other in disbelief. The high priest murmured to his apprentice, "She doesn't know what she's accepted." But she did. The rules were ancient. No strikes were to be thrown. No weapons used. 2 warriors stood in proximity, reading each other's stance, breathing, weight, and impulse. The first to flinch, stumble, or show visible strain lost. It was meant to expose internal chaos, not physical weakness. She faced him with her hands at her sides. He stood opposite her with his fists loosely curled. Silence blanketed the ring. Every eye locked on the pair. They began. No countdown, no sound, just movement. He shifted forward slightly. She tilted her head. He pivoted to his left, putting weight on his rear leg. She mirrored, distributing her balance evenly. Her gaze never left his center. He tried to control his breath without showing it. She exhaled slowly through her nose, steady as gravity. Minute by minute, the ritual continued. Heat built. The crowd leaned in, silent and still. Her clothes clung to her frame, soaked in sweat. He was sweating too, though his armor hid most of it. His jaw tightened. She saw it. Another shift. He moved closer, not touching her but forcing pressure by proximity. She didn't step back. She lowered her shoulders slightly, accepting the space, adjusting her balance, refusing to yield. Then he moved again, closer, enough to feel her breath. She closed her eyes and smiled. His jaw clenched again. That was the crack. Her presence hadn't just matched his. It had surpassed it. Not in strength, but in surrender. She wasn't resisting him. She was absorbing him. That's when his foot shifted a fraction too far outward. Barely a centimeter, but enough to shift his balance unevenly. Her heel pivoted smoothly. She shifted her weight into a low stance, then rose in a spiraling motion that disrupted the air around him. She didn't touch him. She didn't have to. His body responded before his mind could correct. He lost balance. Just a step. Just one. But in the trial of proving, that was all that mattered. He caught himself before falling. Straightened immediately, but it was too late. The chamber exploded. Not in noise, but in energy. Some warriors gasped. Some looked to the elders. The high priest stood with mouth slightly open. The elite guards turned to each other in stunned silence. Riley stood calmly, still balanced, hands relaxed. Tharuk stared at her. She had not broken him. She had revealed him. And for the first time in decades, he lowered his head, not in shame, but in recognition. He walked past her, retrieved the ceremonial badge from the sash across his chest, and held it in his hand. The moment was crystalline. He extended it to her. She looked at it, then shook her head. "I didn't come to take it," she said softly. He met her eyes. "Then take what it means." He dropped the badge at her feet and stepped back. Riley looked at it, then picked it up, not as a trophy, but as an understanding passed from one warrior to another. The crowd slowly bowed, not because they were ordered to, but because something ancient had just been rewritten in front of them. Riley didn't smile. She turned, walked to the edge of the platform, and placed the badge gently in the center of the stone. Then she walked down the stairs, still barefoot, still in flip-flops. And behind her, no one laughed. Riley descended the stone steps slowly, her breath steady, her pulse calm, though the silence behind her pressed like a second gravity. She could feel the collective gaze of the plaza burning into her spine, not with disdain now, but with something heavier, recalibration. The weight of expectations had shifted, not just from her shoulders, but from an entire culture's narrative. The commander's badge remained where she had placed it, centered in the stone circle like an unspoken question, and no one, not even the highest-ranking warrior, had dared to move toward it. She stepped onto the lower landing and paused. The breeze picked up, stirring loose strands of her hair as she turned slightly to glance over her shoulder. Her bare heel pressed into the hot stone. From that angle she saw Tharuk still standing at the circle's edge, arms folded now, not in challenge, but in reflection. He did not follow her. He didn't need to. Whatever needed to pass between them had already been exchanged. An escort of coalition aides waited near the chamber's outer gates, none of them moving. They had witnessed something that protocol had never trained them for. One aide held a communications pad against his chest, wide-eyed. Another blinked repeatedly, as though trying to make sense of what her mind had already accepted but refused to process aloud. Riley said nothing as she approached. She didn't hurry. Her body ached in ways she hadn't anticipated, not from strain, but from holding still for so long under such scrutiny. She glanced once at the aide nearest her and gave a simple nod. That was all. He fell in behind her. The others followed, silent. She did not look back again. As she passed through the final archway of the plaza, a chime echoed overhead, a long, low harmonic tone that had not sounded in generations. The crowd turned collectively toward the great tower where the chime originated. There, rising on the central mast, the banner of reflection was being raised. Woven from the fibers of ancestral robes, it bore no clan mark, no war crest, only a single symbol, the circle split by a vertical line, meaning balance earned. A few warriors gasped, others removed their helmets. Even the high priest lowered his staff. Inside the council chamber, high above the plaza and removed from the theatrics of public space, the elders were already convening. Word had reached them moments after the conclusion of the trial. Surveillance or not, information moved quickly when the unexpected occurred. Now, seated in the half-circle of judgment, the oldest of them leaned forward, eyes narrowed beneath thick ridges of skin and ceremonial ink. Elder Sorvek tapped his clawed finger on the stone table. She refused the badge. Elder Kainur, hunched but sharp-eyed, responded without pause, and in doing so, accepted its weight. The third elder, a quiet female with skin like cracked marble, spoke last. Then she is to be honored, not followed. Silence followed her words, but there was no dissent. Below them, in the quiet of her temporary quarters inside the Coalition consulate, Riley stood at the narrow basin, washing her face. The water felt cooler than it should have, though perhaps it was her skin that burned still from the plaza heat. She splashed once, then leaned over the sink, letting the last droplets slide down her chin onto the metal rim. Her reflection looked back at her, tired, yes, but also still. She dried her face with a cloth beside the basin, then sat on the edge of the narrow cot and looked at her hands. They were marked by sun exposure, by age, by countless interfaces and fieldwork, but today they trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from release. The adrenaline had left her system. Only understanding remained. A knock at the door. She turned. Enter. The door hissed open, and Ambassador Mevrin stepped inside. Tall, elegant, and visibly shaken in a way she rarely allowed herself to be in public. She carried a small case in one hand and a folded document in the other. "I've just come from the Council's transmission node," the ambassador said. "You should see this." Riley stood and took the document first. It was a formal declaration from the Gortharian Cultural Council. The script was dense, the structure archaic, but the final passage had been translated into Earth Standard for her benefit. Let it be known across the banners of fire and stone. The Earthborn Riley Moore did not defeat a warrior today. She redefined the meaning of strength. Her restraint has reshaped our understanding of conflict. Her absence of claim has taught us the nature of presence. As such, she is granted honorary custodian status under Rite 72, and her likeness shall be preserved within the Chamber of Continuance. No further trials shall be required. She has proven enough. Riley folded the paper without comment and looked at the case in Mavren's hand. The ambassador hesitated, then opened it. Inside was the badge, the same one she had laid down on the stone. Polished, preserved. She didn't return it, Riley said, surprised. Mevrin shook her head. No. One of the priest guard recovered it and asked that it be delivered. According to tradition, now that the rite has passed, it's yours to keep. Not as a symbol of command, but as a symbol of what can't be commanded. Riley stared at the badge for a long moment. She didn't take it. Instead, she closed the case gently and pushed it back toward the ambassador. Let them display it. I don't need to own what I already carry. Mevrin nodded. It will be placed in the Chamber of Continuance, next to the empty armor of Tharrock's grandfather. That's significant. Riley sat back down. She didn't speak for a while. Outside, the wind shifted direction, bringing with it the strange blend of volcanic ash and blooming stone vines that grew in the high cliffs. Gorthar had always been a planet of contrast, beauty wreathed in violence, pride forged in blood. But now, just slightly, something softer had seeded itself into that soil. Not weakness, not compromise, just the quiet knowledge that another way was possible. The next day, the Coalition shuttle departed under full ceremonial escort. No weapons lined the hangars, no scowls greeted the delegation. The path had been swept clean of ash. And above the landing bay, the banner of reflection still flew, its shape cutting a strange and elegant silhouette against the sky. Riley stood near the viewport as the planet fell away beneath the shuttle's hull. She could see the dark curve of the War Chamber Plaza, the circular outline of the center stone barely visible now. She said nothing. Her work here was done. Commander Tharrock did not come to see her off. But that wasn't silence. That was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, when earned, was worth more than applause. Riley Moore returned to the Coalition not as a decorated hero, not as a conqueror, but as a reminder. That presence could silence fear. That listening could shift empires. That a human in flip-flops could do what no army had managed in centuries. Not by overpowering, but by understanding. The badge never left Gortar. But her legacy did, forever.